North Alabama School for Organizers presents Fireside Chats, intersectional education through interviews with the organizations and people making real change right now. Listen, learn, and organize with Nassau and Fireside Chats.
So glad to have you here. James has been on last week. He came on last week and did an excellent job with the cook. We got one scheduled for tomorrow, I think, tomorrow evening. And I'm going to try to get some of the people from Dynamite Hill here to talk about what they've been doing in land purchasing in Alabama. And Amy, always good to see Amy. We always have a lot of fun. But Amy is also the co-author of Hillbilly Nationalists. And James and Amy were really the first to kind of start letting people know who the Young Patriots were. We've been kind of lost in the shuffle of history and covered up a little bit, except for a few footnotes here and there. But since that book, it's really opened up a lot of areas of people's interest in Southern whites and organizing, and the Young Patriots and the Rainbow Coalition, and it's just made a world of difference for a lot of the history, the hidden history. And so, Amy, can you tell us just a couple of sentences about yourself in terms of what you do now? And you there? Amy's muted.
Hi. I might be having a slightly unstable internet connection, but I think you asked me to introduce myself and what I'm up to.
You there?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Uh-oh. Stable internet connection. You're talking to a bunch of unstable people.
I
know. Yeah, I can hear you. Go ahead.
Me too. So I, in addition to being co-author of this book with James, have been a librarian for the past decade plus, and also worked in the nonprofit sector doing media justice work, helping folks tell their stories, working on not just access to information and the ability to tell our own stories and to challenge bias in the news media, but to do projects just like this one, where we look at lessons from history and modern day movements, and make sure that folks have the power to use their voices to make change.
Great, fantastic. Okay, what gave you the idea to write this book? And where did that all start from?
Yeah. So James and I each have like slightly different paths in, but I'd say the common thread is that both of us were activists and organizers, looking to movements of the past for inspiration, lessons, what to do, what not to do, to grapple with some of the challenges of our own organizing work. So for myself, I was in my early 20s when I started researching the Young Patriots based on some footnotes in other folks' books or like primary source material like newspapers and flyers and things like that a mentor of mine had shared with me. I learned about Join Community Union and the Young Patriots around the same time and started to trace and figure out how they were related. And then from there, learned about Rising Up Angry, and through my connection with James, learned about the other organizations we write about in Hillbilly Nationalists, October 4th Organization and White Lightning in Philadelphia and New York. And so for me, it really started out as like a study group. What does it look like for white anti-racist or white racial justice organizers to understand and learn from movements in history where real solidarity was built among folks who are organizing around issues of race and class and gender in tandem, and what lessons emerged from that? What does that mean for today in multiracial organizations and movement building? And so the original, sort of aspects of the book were part of a study group. So it was more of a discussion guide and a study. And it was after a little bit of a haranguing that James got me to come on board and write full chapters and start writing the book. So I'll let James pick it up from there and say how he coerced me in a good way, and also how he entered the research.
Oh, you're muted.
Well, if you want to get something done, you ask a busy person. And we had a good friend, Josh, who let us know that we were basically researching different parts of the same story. I was doing a lot of tenant organizing at the time, and one of my comrades in the group that I was in was a guy named Malik Rahim, who was a Black Panther from New Orleans, and he told me about the Young Patriots organization, and got super obsessed with finding out about the Patriots. You got it right. You could really only find out about the Patriots in the footnotes of other groups. But as we dug, as Amy suggested, we found out that the Young Patriots weren't alone. My good friend, rest in peace, Gil Fagiani from White Lightning, really made the case to me that the Patriots were part of a political tendency of working class white people that were inspired by the Black Panther Party, that were devoutly anti-racist and were looking for a way to make their presence known, and within the new left of the 60s and 70s. So yeah, and obviously, doing organizing in the United States, race is always there, right? You can never get away from race. You can either address it effectively or you can address it ineffectively. That's about it. And so, looking for these clues and cues from your work and the work of others led us to the scholarship. It was meant always to be something that people could use. I mean, hopefully this book has traveled in the past 10 years to colleges, but I really want it to be something that someone could give their cousin who might not have gone to college, right? And be readable and engaging that way too. But hopefully it's just a thread of a good example.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure glad you wrote it. It's brought a lot of people together, and also I think the first time we had a chance to discuss it was the Zen book fair. I think Howard Zen book fair in San Francisco, and I think, how long did it take you to write this book? I know you researched it forever, it seemed. Either of you?
About 10 years. I'd say the first half of that was us doing research that we weren't quite sure where it was going, but conducting interviews, and not just because it takes that long to try to find folks and do the interviews and dig through archives, but also because James and I are both workers. At any given time, one or both of us had definitely more than one job. I think at one point I probably had 3, or I had 2 plus graduate school when I went to become a librarian. So we were busy, and also taking the time to build relationships with folks and uncover pieces of a story that wasn't that easy to put together. So outside of Join Community Union and the Students for a Democratic Society aspect of that, most of this wasn't collected anywhere, and hadn't been written about before. So it was a lot of digging through people's personal archives. We were really lucky over time to meet the daughter of Peggy Terry, and to be welcomed into her home, to do research there, not just at our existing archives. And we met you a little too late. Hi. I wish we had met you sooner, but we're glad we met you. We're glad we met you after the fact, and can be family now.
Yeah. Well, I kind of didn't want to be found, and I just finally came out. As a matter of fact, one of the things that really brought me out of, hiding actually, was, no, I was continuing to do, movement work, but just not in any kind of forefront or anything like that. Because, when we moved around, no matter where we went for a long time, the FBI, they knew where we were going, and they would, you know, tell the local authorities about it. And so, even in my own town, I went back and I was harassed and had to move out of there because of, I'm afraid my life and my family, my daughter and wife was in jeopardy. So I kind of just traveled around everywhere a little while, and I don't know. One time I was looking through some Facebook stuff and I found this guy named James Tracy had tried to get in touch with me, and he said, "We've been trying to find you," but it was already a year old, the Facebook. And so I clicked on it and finally got in a conversation, I think, with James. And that book, I had no idea that the book was even out. Okay, I didn't have a clue, so I got the book and started reading the book, and I'm going, wow, some people really did pay attention, I guess, to what we were doing, but we weren't there for the attention. We were there to do, to serve the people, to do the programs. But it was nice that somebody had actually latched on, and you guys had written this book about us that other people could read about, because we felt, I'm gonna say me and Bobby McGinnis and maybe Junebug and other people we felt that we had been forgotten, actually, so that we were insignificant. And so that's really your book is what brought me back out into getting to organize. And that's when I started organizing again, and some of the fun parts is traveling around with you guys and, and talking to people. And I guess it just kind of snowballed from there, but I don't know if it hadn't been for the book. I don't know if I would come out or not, because I was, super paranoid at certain points about my life, and so finally it came out, and I said, oh, I got to get back out here, because I'd also done some research in other areas and found out there was some gross misunderstandings, that was out there, and so I kind of wanted to straighten that situation out. But it was your book that actually, brought me out into the public, and then of course, you met other people that were interested, and I didn't have a clue, and neither did really some of the other patriots that had sort of gone underground, didn't have a clue as to what was happening. But anyway, I think it's a great work, that you've done, and. How many? What did you do in Chicago? Did you meet some of the people, that were in the past, you might say, that are still around? And what was that like?
Most of the people we met with in Chicago were connected with Joining Community Union and Rising Up Angry. But and the Patriot Party, Bob Simpson, who was around the Patriot Party, their branch in DC,
Yeah.
was welcomed us into their home. Amy touched on Margie DeVoe, Peggy Terry's daughter, and I really just her inviting us into our home really was an honor, but it also drove something home, I think, that is really the spirit of this book about where change comes from. Peggy Terry, Peggy Terry is somebody who did not have an advanced education at all. I think it was, Amy, correct me if I'm wrong, I think it was 8th grade education, but maintained archives that were, that would be the envy of any scholar, right? Copious notes, footnotes, correspondence about her work in the movement, and it was, it really just drove home the point that being an intellectual and being a thinker is something that anybody can do, right? Doesn't matter if you have a GED or a PhD, you should have a role in this movement. And I think that's basically, that's the legacy of Peggy Terry. people like Mike James was, from Rising Up Angry and Join, you know, he welcomed us into the back room of the Heartland Cafe with all of his archives that were wonderful, and his photography is just mind-blowingly important. Not as well organized as Peggy's, though. I'll give her that for sure. But it was without this generosity of this leap of faith that so many people gave us, that we would do justice to their stories. We might not be able to tell the entire story because there's only so many pages in a book and everything, but we would do justice and we would be fair. Without that experience of going back and forth to Chicago whenever whenever our paychecks would allow, this book wouldn't have happened. People like Diane Fager from Rising Up Angry, sitting down and just sharing her stories. And I think also just as important was as Margie and Mike's gift, the time that Bob Lee spent. I interviewed him formally. If you could actually have actually call any conversation with Bob Lee formal, because it really wasn't. Yeah. It was long ramblings back and forth and stories and analysis. But the spirit of it, of Bob Lee, the field secretary for the Illinois Black Panther Party, who did the hard work of bringing folks together. I mean, after those 2 or 3 formal interviews, he would call me almost every other week to find out if the book was coming out. I'd be like, no, it's still not coming out for probably another 18 months, probably another 17 months. And he would just call all the time and check in. Oh, I remembered something. You should talk to this person. Mm-hmm. This person's not going to talk to you, but don't take it personally. The people's gifts of their stories and their time is the heart and soul of Hillbilly Nationalists.
You're speaking of Bobby Lee. If you've seen the movie Judas and the Black Messiah, a lot of what Fred Hampton is saying in there it was Bobby Lee's words, and I remember them. Not all of them, but a lot of them was taken directly from Bobby Lee. And he's a hell of an organizer. And also we talk about, when we talk about these people in Uptown, as you were saying, Peggy had an 8th grade education. Peggy Terry, for those that don't know, she was raised very racist. She was a Klan member at one time. Or her husband was probably the Klan member. But she got involved in SNCC and sort of got political at that point. And I met her when I first got to Chicago, and I was reading on the 3rd grade level, but now, you heard about her daughter-in-law, Carol, just passed away, which was Doug Youngblood's widow. Her son, who also was very, very literate, not really much of a formal education, but he was very, meticulous also. And I'm going to be getting his papers from her. So there's another book here, guys, and looking around my room here that I'm in right now, I have 9 boxes of files and everything that I've had to do research on. So it's not an easy thing to sit down and write a book. It's very hard, and very scary, so I can appreciate the fact of what you guys went through, getting this material together for this book. And you're going to have a 2nd edition now, I think. Oh, they're coming here.
The new Patriot over there.
That's the heart and soul. Littles. It's the littles.
Yeah, I told you we were informal, guys. We are. This is all family.
She's very young patriot, yes.
James and Amy, I was going to ask you guys just a couple of interesting questions that I had about going through y'all's work. I guess part of it's related to things that are happening more now. We see, I think, a little bit of a grift is what I like to call them, from some people who are trying to work their way into the left, and doing a little bit of revisionist history, especially about groups like the Young Patriots, White Lightning, the Rising Up Angry groups, these things where they talk about how these are all organizations that were rampant and aggressive white supremacists that by the very power of Fred Hampton were turned back to the light side. Like, with the work and the research that you guys do, what is, I guess, like, what's something that people can look for moving forward about, like, how do we properly get the right information out to people? Like, how do we get over that hump when, as you guys were saying, there's just like so little information, I guess, to be had about some of these organizations? You're having to dig for 10 years through footnotes to get this. How do we overcome this kind of just bad information?
Yeah, I mean, I think we just got to straight up interrupt it when we see it, armed with the information that we have now. If you're in a conversation and we can interrupt it. And I think the other thing is to just point out, there's two different threads I think are happening right now. Some is what's always happened, which is that, conspiracy theorists and folks who are fascists and racists and whatever, they're going to twist however they need to twist to separate people and keep people down. So that's definitely happened, and there's an on-purpose part of it. And then there's also a piece where people are just they don't know what they don't know, and it's hard to see a group like the Patriots and the use of the Confederate flag, for instance, and the imagery of that, and judge it by the standards of the time and try to dig into what was different then. And we write about that in the book a little bit too, with like some of the terminology groups use, like third world liberation, and we don't use terms like third world in the same way now to describe something powerful or good, and so it's we gotta do what we can do to just have the discussion, so we can be like not just comparing two different historic eras as if the language or the standards are the same, but then also being critical. So even if you find something valuable to learn, you got to also be critical. And then I think Hai put this very well, and so I'll let you say more, Hai, because when we had a discussion last week, put it really well around the there's some folks you just can't trust. They're trying to figure out and discern what happened historically, or what was meant by that group, or what they were really aiming for in terms of being an anti-fascist, anti-imperialist, anti-racist organization at their core. And people are just, for their own convenient narrative, trying to exploit the image of the Patriots to twist it into something it's not.
Yeah.
I would point out, I think building off of Amy, there's two different things. There's the fascist creep, where people are trying to use the history of the organize your own, but work together separately to justify separatist politics, things like that, to enter into left spaces and do a real good imitation of an anti-racist, but then try to pull people in a different thing. And then there's just laziness, right? I mean, I'd like to take this moment to give a royal fuck you to Chris Hedges. Read our fucking book, and Jimmy Dory, right?
I'd like to second those.
Yeah, I mean, like read, because both of those people are readers, right? And Chris is a writer, right? And has written some decent stuff, always been a bit of a loose cannon, but I can't say that he's completely useless. But come on, you have the tools at your disposal, aka the public library, to pick up not only our book, but Jacoby Williams's book, and now Hy Thurman's book, and read about it and find out what was actually going on. These are all well documented things. So come on, it's just ridiculous. And for the average everyday person who doesn't have a bunch of time in their lives for reading one book after another, this stuff becomes fodder on Twitter, right? They see Young Patriots, White Aryan, right? And they just retweet it because it's, it's coming from somebody that they that they rely upon for information, right? I don't blame those folks that much. I mean, I'd still like them to read our book or High's book or Jacoby's book, or watch, if they don't read books, they can watch the First Rainbow Coalition. This history is not hidden anymore, right? It used to be hidden. Amy and I took care of that. And then other people have added to this history so wonderfully, right? Almost everything that's come out that I listed, I think is just, looks at this history from a different perspective, but it's all solid, right? Is not, and so if you are somebody that has a gigantic platform or even staff, to get this wrong is negligent. So fuck you, Chris Hedges. You know where to find me. I'm gonna take it on. Jimmy Dore, you want to take us on? Take us on, because we're the credible Hulk. It's like we always, we always come correct with our facts and figures. And you're really doing, to call yourself a progressive and then to blow off, to misrepresent this type of history that's so critical to our understanding of what's possible. It's like, hey, it's your, the ball's in your court. Fix it.
So I do think there's something interesting with that, right? Because there's this, I don't know, I'm kind of terminally online, I like to say to people. So I'm involved in a ton of different spaces and podcasts and things like that that I've worked with. But one of the things that you're seeing is this, there's this, again, re-push for another big tent movement of like people on the far left, like us leftists. We want to try to bring more people in. We want to try to get more progressives active and doing things. And so part of that, I think, spun out of that big tent movement where people we're seeing, well, maybe we can work with this org or that maybe has a checkered past or might not have great values necessarily, but they all agree on Medicare for all, or they all agree on abolishing the police, or they all agree on this one thing that we like. And so maybe we should work with, the Boogaloo Boys on this thing, or like this other weird borderline white supremacist organization. And that's where some of those progressives come from. Based on your guys' research and the stuff that you did, like, is that like has that ever been a winning strategy, is to try and convert some sort of like weird, maybe not Nazi organization, but something that's like pushing that adjacent line to try and pull them left? Or is that like, should we just be abandoning them based on the things you guys have found?
Go ahead, Amy.
I want to hear what High has to say, and you too, James. But I'll just say this. I think about it as an organizer. Nobody's disposable, and we have a job to do to organize folks. Like, I'll speak for myself as a young person, was like targeted and recruited by neo-Nazi folks in Pennsylvania as a young kid at punk rock shows. And it's other folks reaching me so that I got an education or had an alternative to getting swept up into that bullshit that really matters. And I think the main thing to demystify here is that, so on the one hand, nobody's disposable. It's the job of organizers to organize folks away from that bullshit. And then secondly, that's just never what the Patriots were, or any of these organizations. And so I want to thank James again for being like, it's lazy when folks don't do the research. It's not that Fred Hampton or the Panthers went to an organization that had a checkered past. There were folks in the neighborhood who were still in the process of coming to like a consciousness and a political understanding and an anti-racism, because they'd been raised in the same racist, white racist bullshit that all of us are. But the Patriots were never a near right organization that needed to be turned. And so I think that the conversations are really different. The like, can you align with a near right organization, or is there any hope there? I don't think so. Are there individual members that of those organizations, or people who are like flirting around the edges, that should be organized away from that shit? Yes. Were the Patriots ever that? No.
I like that answer quite a bit. That's good.
well, you see what we were doing, and I agree, Amy, is that we never really tried to turn organizations because we knew that was almost impossible. Now we did have, the American Nazi Party there for a little while until we kicked their ass and then they left. But, some you have to. But we were always about finding some of those members within those organizations or in the culture, we might say, in Uptown at that time, of, Southern white people who were, racist and were white supremacists, and we were raised in that environment also, so we could understand it. And so we would find some type of a commonality, that we could work with. Commonality, of course, being a Southern white poor migrant with Southern white poor migrants doesn't automatically get them to open their door and bring you into dinner. There's all different thoughts as the way that people are raised, so even the use of the Confederate flag, that was, very controversial, but it was a part of the time. It was more a part of the time than it is now, by saying that it was there and it was almost invisible because everybody just about had that flag. If you go into bars, they'd have it, for instance, bumper stickers, whatever, and you see some of that now. But people didn't look at it in terms of I'm saying some people didn't look at it in terms of the way that they look at it now. They look at it as a very white supremacist, Trump flag. And so, but we were able to talk to these folks and explain to them, what the symbol meant. And we were able to explain to them that, yeah, we're all on the same boat. We are. Those folks on the west side over there, or those Hispanic folks are all the same. We're all in the same boat. We were poor. We were oppressed. We were, literally being killed. So what we had to do was to use that to our advantage, to talk to the folks about it and convince them that maybe there is a better way, at least support what we're doing if you don't want to join us. But the other thing is we had to give them something. We had to give them some ideology. We had to give them a way that they could organize, or they could at least attend some meetings to fight for their own, for their housing, for instance, urban renewal. But also we were able to, with the Panthers, open up a free health clinic, and breakfast for children program. So you have to give people something sometime. The talk, the rhetoric, it just doesn't get there a lot of times when people are, are starving, so we would pull people, away from those racist beliefs and white supremacy or those groups, and try to get them to start associating with us instead of the other groups. And that worked, that worked. I would not suggest using the flag today because it's something completely different, So that was just an organizing technique for us. And it worked for a while. It worked.
Well, I believe that the only good Nazi is an ex-Nazi.
Yeah.
And, I think that, Amy and I are pretty aligned on this, and High as well. Is like, we have to go toe to toe, because one of the best ways to defeat the right is to make less right-wing people, right? And that. So I would never work in coalition with a Nazi group. or a fascist group at all? Am I going to reach out to conservative people who are flirting with those ideas, right? Because they see it as a solution to their problems. Yeah, I'm going to go toe to toe with that. Organizations that I'm part of, I want to be able to be relevant, to people who are angry, because when progressives and the left, abandon any group, right, and just say write any group off as unorganizable, permanently reactionary. We've heard it before. Uh, the right just steps right in and say, "Guess what? We care about you, right? Come on over to this bowling league. You're welcome here." And so yeah, I completely reject the idea that, say, like, the DSA has to work with the Boogaloo Boys. I think that's ridiculous,
Yeah.
right? And keep in mind these ideas go fairly, way back. Ralph Nader actually wrote a whole book about this type of stuff. Um, but no, but should we build the types of organizations and movements that welcome people in, meet people at their self-interest, like you mentioned, and then try to move people to a point of solidarity? Should we accept imperfect people into our organizations so they can be exposed to different ideas? Yeah. I mean, in 1989, I had, like, 2 or 3 friends went into white supremacy, right? Because they were poor, they were from Vallejo, and the right said, "Come on over," right? And they did. So that's it's we like I said, we have to go to toe to toe, because when we see these populist moments, I always like to point out that, a lot of the critique of neoliberalism in economics, Pat Buchanan and Naomi Klein sound a lot alike, right? They're pointing out how bad globalization has been for everyday people. And then, but you scroll down a little bit, you read, or you read the book. Naomi Klein proposes pathways of solidarity, of groups coming together and supporting one another and finding commonality and fighting the scourge. And Pat Buchanan, basically, if you look at his early stuff, basically, basically a far right white nationalist, early version of Trump. He just didn't win the presidency as he wanted to, but probably would have had the same. So when people are rightfully upset about how NAFTA has ravaged their communities, and every single last turkey, horrible piece of trade agreements afterwards, we have to be there to say, like, let's blame the people who are at the table negotiating that thing, not the people who set the table negotiating those things.
Yeah, I like that. I think there's something where you have to show up kind of in that Fred Hampton quote that gets used a lot about fighting capitalism with socialism. You have to go into these conversations, where somebody's NAFTA's ruined their life, and you have to show up with a, mutual aid, and you have to show them that kind of, open tent socialist solution is going to be a lot better for them than the, go beat up the Hispanic guy down the street from you solution, right? And so as far as, like, the research you guys have done, though, how does that tie in to I'm getting some echo back here on my hands, hold on. So how does that tie in with some of the other organizations that were adjacent to you guys, or that you see nowadays that are starting to grow out, like things like a DSA, things like the John Brown gun clubs, those types of things? What kind of correlations do you see from the early eras to now, based on your research? And, like, do you think this movement's kind of heading the right direction? Is it spinning its wheels? Are we making progress from where we were then to now?
Take it away, Amy.
Well,
I was gonna let Hi answer, like based on your work in Alabama.
Well, he knows. Donald
I've
already
watched a
knows.
bunch of it. Yeah.
Donald, you already know a lot of obscure questions not for him.
He already knows my thinking about it.
Yeah.
I think the groups today have learned from the past. You're talking about John Brown Gun Club and even Rednecks for Black Lives. I could keep going with them. And they've learned that from the past. I mean, they've looked at the past. They've looked at not only what the Young Patriots have done, but what other groups have done or unions have done, which is very important to look at. But I've also seen some of them slide, I guess, to the right or the left. I don't know how else to put it. I don't know if it's not a liberal, or it's not it's not a leftist, but they're to the right of the left, and folks that really did some hardcore organizing, and yet it's pretty easy to be, I guess, bought off, which is, I think, what some of James was talking about too. It's pretty easy for the right to buy people off. So I think we have to be aware of that. That's where you get your informants. That's where you get, that's where you get a lot of the William O'Neills, for instance, which is coming into the scene now. We had a guy that was very popular in SDS and Join in Uptown. The next thing we know, he's the assistant state's attorney for New Jersey, and definitely against us, so he may not have started out that way, but if you don't keep that value, your values, you're going to lose it. And it's very easy for people to, to kind of slide to the right. Is that what we're talking about, Donald? Was that?
Yeah, I mean, the big thing is when you look at an organization like DSA, which, I mean, you and I have had more than our fair share of conversations about the way that organization functions, and what the work we tried to do inside of it and then ended up having to go outside of it to do. But I mean, we see so many of these other things that are springing up. I mean, there are periodically, I don't know if you've seen them, but there's a group in South Carolina that's just trying to revive the Young Patriots organization to its old glory. And, so, I mean, I guess that the big question is like, have we learned enough lessons? Did we learn the lessons correctly? And like, do you feel like we're applying those? Or, I mean, is there especially for Amy and James, is there, based on the research you're seeing, you're just like, oh gosh, you guys are falling into pitfall number 4 again. It's like, it's all of it. So is there what is there any kind of tidbits there that you would say where it's just like we see that kind of like history repeating itself and it's like, whoa, let's pump the brakes on this?
No, we haven't learned enough lessons, and no, there's not an organization out there that's just nailing it and getting it right. I think the thing to keep in mind is James framed it really well in the beginning. It's like race is always there. Racism and white supremacy have been a problem. You're either working on it or you're not. And I think organizations that are majority white folks or in majority white communities or addressing racism at its source in white communities can make a lot of progress and then fall back into not addressing racism and white supremacy as strongly as we need to. And so I think we see organizations, depending on, whether they're nonprofits or 501c4s or, small startup, scrappy activist organizations, grappling with these questions of what does it look like to address white supremacy, to organize white folks around like our deeply felt survival needs, mutual class interests across lines of race, but do it without ever losing sight of the fact that white supremacy breaks movements in this country and can break organizations and has. So I think there's some inspiring work happening out there, but I don't know that you can't draw a straight line from the organizations in the 60s. They had great lessons. People are applying it now and it's all, going well, or people are ignoring those lessons, and therefore it's always been complicated and difficult. I think that if we look to the Patriots and White Lightning and these other organizations, what they did well, that the best of organizations today do well, is some of what we've talked about today, which is like talk to folks, move folks, show them an alternative to the bullshit that they're being fed, and the false explanations that they're being fed about the reason for their problems, whether it's economic or health or whatever's going on in their communities. Interrupt the lies that the right is going to tell, and keep doing that work. And then I'd say the other thing is that folks come into movement and stay in movement from a place of heartfelt need and being in deep motion, and then building mutual respect. And so that organize your own, but let's do it in coalition and alliance is a strong lesson from the past. And I think we're still, across a bunch of organizations, fighting and aspiring to live up to that.
I think what you're bringing up is really about mapping the movement as it stands now, right? We have a very divided movement, but we have new possibilities that we never haven't seen for a long, long time. You used to not even be able to say the word socialist at all, right? With a straight face or without being run out of the room. And now it is being actively discussed about what that means for us now in the 21st century, which is in the United States, which is very, very different, right? It says we have this moment of thinking about an egalitarian society that is untethered from the failed experiments such as the Soviet Union and and China that were dissolved for internal contradictions, not just the external pushes of imperialism. We can imagine something brand new, right? Drawing from the best lessons, and I think that's what groups like the DSA are doing. And for everything that you could criticize a chapter from DSA doing, you can also praise them the next day, right? Which is great, because it's a living experiment of a fastly growing organization that looks very different from city to city, right? I'm very proud of the DSA folks in the East Bay and San Francisco about how engaged they are with everyday struggles and things like that. I know that not every single last chapter shares the same qualities, right? But I'm very excited about that. I'm excited about Cooperation Jackson, right? About that grand experiment. Very different. Looks very different than DSA, but is really great. But getting to your thing about lessons, one lesson that I don't think is being heard loud enough around the organizations that take Young Patriots as an inspiration for the good reasons, right? Is the use is the gun question. I think that history shows us that we always have to support the right of oppressed people to defend themselves by any means necessary, right? Absolutely. But if you want to lead into the conversation with guns, right, you're going to attract some really odd characters, right? You are going to attract the Tom Moshers of the world, people who infiltrated the Young Patriots. You are going to attract people who will betray you, and you will not be leading with a vision of what liberation actually looks like, because you're leading in with guns, right? And leading with guns is very different from saying, hey, we have the right to defend ourselves. We have the right to have these things because the other side is the biggest purveyor of violence. Totally valid positions, right? But to to foreground guns over survival programs, over serving the people, over making alliances across the racial lines in a working class context. That was the magic of the Rainbow Coalition. It wasn't the fact that guns were present. The magic was the coalitions. The magic was the serving the people. The magic was the 10-point programs, the 11-point programs, and the 13-point point programs that pointed in radically different directions. So I think that if the rush to emphasize the macho parts and the gun parts is going to have consequences, right? And I don't impugn the intentions of that, right? You want to, the other side's big and scary. You want to be big and scary, right? That's like, elementary school fight 101. I get it, but to lead with that, I think is just going to end up biting folks in the ass.
Okay. Hey, it's getting near that end time, guys. We really appreciate you being on here.
Yeah.
It's been great. We got to do it again,
Yeah, we love you guys, and keep organizing.
We
Yeah.
will.
Good to meet you all. Thank you for the great questions, Donald. And hi.
Oh, thank you.
And Tom, nice to meet you. Good to see the baby.
Yeah, I appreciate you guys coming on and doing this. I'm super excited to get a copy of High's book here soon that you guys also helped with.
Oh, I thought I sent you one. I'll get you one in the mail.
Nice. And then, yeah, because that's my big thing is I need one autographed, right? Like I don't want just like, so if you guys get the chance, I can give you an address if y'all want to autograph one of the Hillbilly Nationalists for me, if I can mail one off to you guys.
You can. Why don't you wait? This will be our time to pitch. August 17th, Hillbilly Nationalists is going to have a 10-year anniversary edition. It's going to have an appendix with our superstar High Thurman in the back, a new interview with High, or mostly new interview. You have good old fashioned index, everything. It's going to be great. So hit us up then, and we'll definitely autograph your copy.
Awesome.
Thanks, guys.
See you guys.
I appreciate y'all.
Peace. Talk
Thanks,
to you
y'all.
later. Bye.
Fireside Chats is a production of North Alabama School for Organizers. NASO seeks to empower communities through intersectional education and training. More information, including upcoming classes, at naso.network. Thank you for joining us for Fireside Chats.